It's been a while, but we are back to read more Echo Mountain. We're going to pick up with chapter 29. It's awful bad, Larkin said when he saw the disaster of Kate's leg. Honesty, good manners, and honesty. I liked those qualities in a person. Oh, now, you know better than that. There are things still to be tried, Kate said. She turned to me. I've been teaching Larkin about healing, this and that, now and then, else it will all be wasted when I go. She closed her eyes, clearly worn out by all the talk. First we clean it, Larkin said, swallowing, then the honey, then we take care of the fever. I was glad to have an order to things. It had been just hours since I'd found this place, this woman, her wound. If I'd had an order to this day, it might have sent me back to bed instead of out into such a surprising world. Eat breakfast, feed Maisie, find bee gift on trail, see wild dog on path to river, go fishing with Samuel, build fire, get bee sting. Learn that quiet isn't mine anymore. Put snake in daddy's bed. Climb mountain. Find dog again. Find the hag. Make fire. Cook rabbit and trout. Feed Kate and Captain. Go back down mountain. Look for Samuel and quiet. Feed potion to daddy. Get honey. Get stung some more. Climb mountain again. Meet Larkin. And now there was more to come, all in this one day. Clean terrible wound. Pack with honey. And surely other things I could not predict. But it all felt oddly perfect. So we lit the lamps as the day went dark and washed our hands with tallow soap and spring water. Then we pulled Kate's blanket down to her feet and stood staring at her poor leg. My mother had taught me not to say the Lord's name in vain, so I didn't. But I did send a prayer skyward before I took up my spoon and Larkin his, and we began to carefully scrape the maggots off Kate's ruined skin, tapping our spoons against the lip of the jar so the maggots would fall like dollops of oatmeal to collect in the bottom. We breathed through our mouths as we worked, the smell of her leg sweet and sour both. Even Captain retreated to a far corner, though he watched us steadily from there, his eyes like small moons in the lamplight. When we had removed the last of the maggots, I used my spoon to scrape away the pus welling up out of the holes that the Fisher cat had made. I decided that I would never again be able to eat custard without thinking of that pus. What does it look like? Kate asked through her clenched teeth. Larkin held the lantern close and peered at it. I need to cut you to get the honey in there. She nodded. Clean the knife first, she said, her whole body rigid, her feet arching with pain and the thought of more to come. It didn't make much sense to clean the knife when her leg was already festering, but I didn't want to add insult to injury, and being clean was almost never a bad thing. I took out my knife. I'll put it in the fire, which I did, all of us quiet while the flames burned it clean. Then Kate turned her face to the wall, tucked her little doll up between her shoulder and her ear, and waited for us to begin. I handed the knife to Larkin. I could have done the cutting. I thought I could have done the cutting, but she had told him to do it, not me, and I confessed that I was happy to let him do it, and not happy at the same time. Larkin held the knife over the wound for a long moment, blinking and breathing hard, and then he made the cut with one hard, slow sweep, Kate jerking only a little, groaning only a little, the blood sweeping down as if Larkin had pulled a set of long red curtains across her leg. When we pulled apart the edges of the wound, we could see that the infection had worked its way down into her muscle, but not too far. I hoped not too far. I took the honey from the jar and from my pack, and went out into the clearing, unscrewed the lid, tipped it quickly off, and waited, at a safe distance, for the trapped bees to fly away. When they did, I took the jar back inside. Then, while Larkin held the wound open, I squeezed the comb like a wax sponge onto the wound until it was full of honey. Then we pushed the wound closed with our fingers, the honey oozing up and gluing the seam mostly shut. For bandages, I cut the sleeves from my shirt, which my father had made for me with his own hands, which I hated to ruin, which I chose to ruin. and used them to bind up the wound, to keep it closed. Oddly, it was only after we had finished, after the part that was hardest for someone awake, that Kate fainted. It was as if she had managed to be strong while she had to be strong, but gave in to weakness as soon as she could. And I felt much the same as we finished our work and finally sat down on the floor to rest. Chapter 30. We'll keep them just in case, though they'll turn to flies soon, Larkin said, peering into the maggot jar at the terrible little nurses in their white uniforms. How odd that creatures so mixed up with mess could be so clean and tidy. We can always get more if we need them later on. How do we do that? I asked, watching Kate's face as she slept. I hoped she was dreaming about something pretty. We'll kill something, a rabbit maybe, and wait for the flies to find it. Lay their eggs, wait for the eggs to hatch. It takes no time at all. I imagined that, Kate, alone on the mountain, doing that. She said those weren't her tools. I nodded toward the workbench. They aren't, he said. It wasn't a sad thing to say, but it sounded sad. Then why are they here? He didn't answer for a long moment. They were her sons. And he died. Larkin looked away. Oh, now I know why she didn't like it when I heated up a chisel. He looked back at me curiously. Why did you do that? I thought I might try to kill the infection. He raised his eyebrows. You were going to burn her? She was unconscious when I found her. I didn't know the maggots were there on purpose. I thought back to how it had felt to stand in that dim cabin with no one to teach me what to do. I figured I would burn the cut clean. He opened his eyes wide. Do you think you could have done that? I lifted one shoulder. I don't know, but I meant to try. He seemed to like that, but he said, burning can lead to infection. You shouldn't try that unless someone's bleeding to death. I thought back to my father, burning the cut on his hand. I remembered how he treated it afterward with vinegar. I'm glad she woke up when she did. So what now? Larkin used his knife to stab a hole in the lid and then put the jar of maggots on the shelf next to the one with the blood-fat tick. From the books on Kate's desk, he chose one as thick as 3 Bibles. She likes this one. I carried a lantern to the desk. Health and Longevity, I read. The cover was chapped and raw with handling. You know how to read? He said. I nodded. Of course. But then I realized that not everyone had started life in a town. I went to school before we came to live here, I said. And my mother was a teacher, so we still have lessons every day. Larkin stared at me. Every day? I nodded, though lately I'd had lessons of another kind. You can come down and get some whenever you want. He thought about that. If she's teaching you lessons, why did you say she was a teacher? I thought back. Is, then? He made no answer except to turn again to the book, which he opened to a section near the end. He turned the pages slowly, his lips moving, until he stopped and said, Poisoned wounds. He stopped again and read to himself, then aloud. Wounds sometimes received by butchers, cooks, and fish dealers who handle... He paused. I looked over his shoulder. Putrefying, I said. Putrefying animal matter, he continued. Such wounds are particularly... He paused again. Virulent, I said. He looked at me. I'm not a very good reader. He tipped his head at Kate. She's been teaching me. It will get easier the more you do it. He nodded, turned back to the book. A wound of this character should be thoroughly washed, he read. Opened and swabbed with pure carbolic acid, then washed with... He skipped a word or two. Mercury solution and wet antiseptic dressing. Bites by animals should be so treated, the human bite being one of the worst. He took a deep breath as if he'd climbed something steep. I thought about how snippy Samuel became if I helped him with a tough word. I hope you don't mind that I helped you with that. Why would I mind? I shrugged. My little brother thinks he should already be able to do things that he doesn't know how to do. Larkin frowned. Why would he think that? To which I had no answer. I looked again at the book. What does it say about fever? I already know enough about fever. But I don't, I replied. So he turned the pages one by one, past drawings of how to bandage and carry a wounded person, to a section called Inflammation. We read the section together. "We don't have what they say to use," he said, "but she taught me about willow bark, and there's some in that jar there." He pointed. "I'll build up the fire, you fetch some water from the spring. We'll make her a tea." "And what do we use instead of carbolic acid or those other things in the book, in case the honey doesn't work?" He tipped his head again. "Why would you worry about what might not happen? The honey is good for now, and we can brew witch hazel for cleaning her. And if we need something else, we'll try something else." I thought of my father. I thought of the elses I had tried, and the others that were waiting their turn. Larkin was reading more of the book, Captain watching Kate like a mother, while I went out into the night to tap the spring, so I was alone when I saw that the stars had also come out to be with us. They leaned down as if they thought I might have something to say, or as if they did. But the wind had a louder voice, and it told me to hurry now, to heat some water for willow bark tea, to wake Kate so she could drink it, to make enough to take down the mountain for my father, though he had no fever. Willow bark was one of the elses I would try. "What else?" I asked the stars, but they were silent on the matter. "Star Peak," I said to them. "That's what this mountain top is called now." And I felt I had a perfect right to name it, as long as everyone else did too. Like the river, like the mountain itself, which someone else had named Echo, which was also Ellie's mountain, which was also Larkin's, which was also Kate's, and my father's, and Samuel's too. But I didn't think my mother or Esther would want their names on any part of this mountain, and it made me sick and sad to think so. We would need something else to bind us back to whole, all of us, to make them want to be where they were, to wake my father, to make me understand how I could be theirs and they mine, and yet none of us the same, me least of all. For all that, we would need another else, and that was another else I meant to find. Chapter 31. After we woke Kate and fed her the willow tea, I filled my honey jar with a cooled portion for my father and put it in my pack. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Larkin asked. But before I could answer, Kate said, "I'm grateful for your help, but I won't need you now with Larkin here and close by when he's not." There was nothing rude about what she'd said, and it made sense that she wouldn't need me, merely a stranger, when she had this boy she'd taught how to read and how to make willow bark tea and how to pack a wound with honey. It made sense, but it also made me sad. "I might need you, though," I said. "My father is in a coma. That means—" Kate's eyes widened, bright with fever and something else. "I know what that means," she snapped. Which of course was true, that she knew about medicines from the wild, but also the sicknesses and cures in those books on her desk. "What's a coma?" Larkin asked, though if he'd been watching me these last months, he surely knew that something had happened to my father, whether he'd seen the accident or not. "It means he's been unconscious for a long time," Kate said impatiently. "And this is something you're just now telling me?" I took a step back. "I met you a few hours ago, though it seemed like days. You're sick and hurt. When was I supposed to tell you about my father?" She flapped a hand tiredly. "Oh, well, all right then. But I know a thing or two about what ails a body. Come back if you want to, for help." "And you can come get me if you need to," I told Larkin. I gave him a long look and told him what he already knew. Straight down the deer path to a better path, and then straight down some more to a cabin with a woodshed. But don't go near that. It's full of puppies, and their mother is nervous." "Puppies?" Kate said in a somewhat stronger voice. "You didn't tell me that either." "No," I said, confused by how changeable she was, sending me away one minute and then wanting to know me the next. "But you haven't told me anything much about you, either." I turned to Larkin. "And I know nothing at all about you," though I did. The thought of not knowing him better, not knowing them better, felt like hunger, which was when, without warning, I felt as if I might start to cry. I tried to say something else, but all that came out was a croak, more bird than frog, but animal regardless, a puny animal, one that was used to feeling small. The two of them stared at me in the yellow lantern light. Captain stood up and watched me closely. I put my jacket on over my shirt with its missing sleeves, picked up my pack, cleared my throat. I hope you get better now, Miss Kate. I looked at Larkin. I hope we never have to do any of this ever again. Though that wasn't entirely true. And I took myself and my unspilled tears out the door. I didn't get far. The stars stopped me for a minute in the clearing outside Kate's cabin. There aren't many hurts that a sky meadow full of clean white blossoms can't make at least a little better. But as I watched them, as my eyes became accustomed to the darkness, as the trees at the edge of the clearing slowly took shape, one from the next, I saw someone standing among them. I felt my shoulders rise around my neck. My whole body went terribly hot. It was a woman, standing so still she might have been a tree herself, except she wasn't. Everything about her said something else. It was dark, and she was some distance away, but something awful reached across that clearing and touched me, and I felt what the fisher cat must have felt when faced with a hungry dog 5 times its size. But as I stood there watching her, I realized that I wasn't just afraid, I was shocked by how dark she was, how bitter, like something scorched, and I could feel that bitterness even across the clearing. I waited for her to move, to say something, but she just stood there. The way home was to my left, close by, and I wondered if I could just go quickly and be away and gone. But it was a long way down to home, and it was dark enough and the path strange enough that I couldn't hurry without risking a fall. So I turned, instead, and went back into Kate's little cabin and shut the door behind me. "Third time you didn't knock," Kate said from her bed. Larkin looked up from the big book. Captain, lying on the floor by Kate, raised his head, looked at me, and began to growl. "What's this, Cap?" Kate said. "There's a woman," I said, "at the edge of the clearing." Captain stood up, stiff-legged, and growled some more, deep in his throat. But Larkin surprised me by sighing, closing the book, rising from his chair and standing taller than he had before. "You go on," he said to me, coming to open the cabin door. He led me outside. The woman was closer now, halfway across the clearing. "Go on," Larkin said again. "Go on home." There was something urgent in his voice. I looked at the woman who had come closer still. "Who is that?" Larkin took my arm and pushed me a little toward the path. "My mother." And we'll pick up again in a few days. See you in class.